Continuing chapter 3 from part 6. Great multitudes flocked to him on this journey. Luke reports that he gave them this description of such discipleship as he required and enforced his teaching with striking illustrations and the repetition of what he had elsewhere spoken. Well, some of the repetitions just happen to be different accounts that are being worked in, though. This is the address from Luke 14. If anyone come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, and yet more, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So love by and for God, isn't it like 11 verses in the Bible? The 66 book version. And the hate, like 154 or something like that. Or is it 145? Or it's over 10 times the number, right? Whoever bears not his cross and comes after me cannot be my disciple. Well, you gotta bear your own burdens. It's not that Jesus bears the burdens for anybody. And willing to die for fulfilling what your mission is. That's really the metaphor there. And of course you can survive giving your life for something, right? Because you just keep living for it. For who of you, wishing to build a tower, does not sit down first to count the cost, whether he has the means to finish it, lest, haply, after he has laid the foundation and not been able to finish it, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to war against another king sits not down first to consult whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him that comes against him with 20,000? And if not, he being yet afar off, he sends an embassy and asks for peace. So likewise every one of you who forsakes not all that he has cannot be my disciple. Now salt is good, but if the salt become insipid, with what shall it be seasoned? It is fit neither for the land nor the manure. They cast it out. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. And, well, things have one use and have been ruined for that use, may not have another use. And, of course, salt is one of those things. You don't want salt in your garden. Like some places, like the family plot of land for hundreds of years, they have an area where they worked with they did this stuff with the salt, and it was away with the garden. And they'd have the grill, and basically, but there'd be salted land around the grill. But this was a sifting speech. It taught them that it was no holiday amusement to be his disciple, but that it involved a subordination of all the passions to their consecration to him. In using the cross as the symbol of self-denial, Jesus seems again to have given prophetic intimation of his death. In the minds of the disciples, there could have been no such connection. Internally, the erection of a Christian character is like the erection of any other great structure. A man must lay his plan. He must study to know what is necessary to execute it. He must assure himself that he has the requisite resources. Well, we all have the resources to do what we are supposed to and not do what we're not supposed to, ultimately. But certainly a certain character builds its way up or tears down, The conflict of a Christian life is like any other war, except not all wars have contradictions in the findings that you're called to accept. One must consider the opposition and how and with what he is to meet it. These illustrations mean only to impress the necessity of entering on discipleship with amplest determination to go forward to complete success. Then crowds of publicans and sinners drew near to hear him. Luke says all the publicans and sinners, he received them kindly and taught them ways of the kingdom of the heavens. We're bouncing things off of Luke 15 now. This gave the Pharisees occasion to murmur. They said, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." In reply, Jesus delivered those 3 parables of surpassing beauty, which were to illustrate his favorite proposition that the Son of Man come to seek and to save that which was actually lost. They ought to be read consecutively without break. And so we give them. And we have a drachma of Archaao. Okay. What man of you, having 100 sheep, and having lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the desert, and go after the lost one until he find it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders rejoicing, and coming into the house he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." I say to you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repents, more than over 99 just persons who have no need of repentance. And usually what makes a person just is that they have reconsidered their mistakes. Not that there's absolutely no mistake that they ever made. Are what woman having 10 drachmas, 140 cents, if she lose 1 drachma, 14 cents, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently till she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I've found the drachma which I lost." Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Give me the portion of goods that falls to me." And he divided between them the means of living. And not many days after, the younger son, having gathered all together, took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his sustenance, living profligately. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land. In that country. And he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country. And he sent him into his fields to feed swine. Remember, Jesus' disciples and the people around him were not people who ate swine. And he would fain have been filled with the pods that the swine did eat. And no one gave to him. Carobs, not too bad of a food. Carob's actually pretty good. Wish I could find a regular carob instead of this sugared and sweetened and milked stuff. Can't find it anymore, but they're giving so much of it to the pigs. And coming to himself, he said, "How many hired servants of my father have bread enough and to spare, and I am perishing here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, and was moved with compassion, and ran, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your sight. I am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired servants. But the father said to the slaves, Bring forth quickly the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, and sandals on his feet. And bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again, and was lost and is found. They began to be merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew nigh to the house, he heard music and dancing. And having called one of his servants, he asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother is come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound. And he was angry, and would not go in. But his father coming out entreated him, and he answering said to his father, Lo, these many years do I serve you, and never did I transgress your command. And you never gave me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But when this your son is come, who has devoured your means of living with harlots, you have killed for him the fatted calf. And he said to him, Child, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. But it was needful to make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead, and is alive. He was lost, and is found. So everyone in the story needed a lesson, right? Or needed something about it. The connection and the climax in this series of parables must be noticed. They indicate a regular discourse rather than a collection of sayings. Ownership, in some sense, is the connecting thought. A lifeless coin, a living domestic animal, a son. This is the climax. If the order in which Luke gives was observed in the address, then it would logically seem thus. The recovery of a lost animal is a cause of rejoicing, nay, even the recovery of a coin. How much more the recovery of a son? Men are represented as the sons of God, and all sinful. Sinners are of two classes, prodigal sinners and Puritan sinners. See, again, this sons of God talk, people know it's not literal. Well, the profligate and the people who are trying to be good, right? Those who gravitate toward the condition of outlaws, and those who gravitate towards the condition of sneaks. Well, no, that's not sneaks. It's that people are trying to be good, and they wish they were good, and other things kind of override it, but it's not that they're just, I mean, some people, sure, they have some side life, and, they want to be seen good on one hand, but they, but that's often not the case. In some particulars, the prodigal is worse than the elder brother. In many others, the elder brother is worse than the prodigal. The yearning love of the father draws the wanderer home. The goodness of the father bears with the son, who is a hypocrite. In any case, when a human being is lost, God is the loser. This puts the appeal to every human heart on a higher plane than mere selfish taking care of oneself. If we fail in any way, it's our own failing. It doesn't hurt God in any sense here. Even if we say that God loves us more than, like in the prophetic saying of Muhammad, which is narrated with greater strength than anything in the Bible, in historical terms, I mean, that God loves the individual more than 70 mothers. It doesn't mean that people can hurt God. Because all these people talk about, you hurt God with your sin. It's like, no. people hurt themselves, especially when the laws of nature dictate consequences, our society does or something. See these ideas enlarged in my published sermons entitled The Puritan, Sinner, and Lost. Then follows this parable from Luke 16. There was a certain rich man that had a steward, and he was accused to him of wasting his property. And calling him, he said to him, What is this which I hear of you? Render an account of your stewardship, for you can be no longer a steward. And the steward said within himself, What shall I do, because my Lord takes the stewardship away from me? I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. I know what I will do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their house. And calling each one of his Lord's debtors, he said to the first, How much do you owe, my Lord? And he said, 100 baths, 866 gallons of oil, and said to him, Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. And then said to another, How much do you owe? And he said, 100 cores, 1,109 bushels of wheat. And he said to them, Take your bill and write 80. And the Lord praised the unjust steward because he did prudently. For the children of this life are more prudent for their generation than the children of light. This seems the very best translation of the original word. It was used in Wycliffe's translation, but unfortunately was changed in the common version. There may be prudence without wisdom, for prudence is often a rascally virtue. And I tell you, make for yourselves friends of the riches of injustice, that when it falls, they may receive you into the enduring tabernacles. He that is faithful in the least is faithful also in much. If therefore you have not been faithful in the unjust riches, who will commit to you the true? And if you have not been faithful in another's, who will give you yours? No domestic can serve two masters, for he will either hate the first and love the other, or he will adhere to the first and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Well, one of the things about this is that don't say, oh, if I got this great stuff or if I got a better job. No, you have to do well with what you have. Because how can you expect to do well or right or whatever with the better situation if you're not doing it with the inferior situation? Perhaps we shall simplify the difficulties which many have found in this parable by learning to whom it was addressed and what it was intended to teach. It was not addressed to the scribes and Pharisees, but as Luke expressly says, to his disciples. It was intended to teach prudence in the management of a man's spiritual affairs. The ordinary lack of this prudence makes the more conspicuous by contrasting it with the prudence of men who are absorbed in worldly matters. Here was a steward to whom was committed the affairs of his rich employer. The bonds made by the steward, who seems to have had a power of attorney, would bind the master. He, moreover, lent the money of the master, and took obligations, therefore. He became wasteful. Upon learning this, the employer expostulated with him indignantly, and ordered him to settle up his affairs. This gave him time to think, but he did not delay. He went from bad to worse. He now resolved to rob his master. Calling the debtors together, he made a swift arrangement with them. They were not poor tenants, but rich neighbors, and large business themselves, or else they could not have been trusted with such amounts of costly articles as oil and wheat. He handed back their bonds and received in return bonds for a much less sum. They were thus laid under great pecuniary obligation to this steward. They did not know that he was about to lose his place, but he did. So, when he was discharged and had ground of an appeal to them, when his employer discovered what had been done, he complimented the shrewdness of a man who had been most dishonest towards him. It was only the forecast, not the dishonesty, that was praised. Jesus used the parable to teach his disciples prudence in regard to the future of their souls. A great difficulty exists in the saying of Jesus, "Make for yourselves friends of the mammon of injustice, that when it fails, they may receive you into the enduring tabernacles." Money is represented under the name mammon, and it has been said that this was the name of the Syrian god of wealth, as Plutus was in the Greek mythology, and Lakshmi in what they call the Hindu. Of course, there's no unity of Hindu as one religion or something, but there are some pretty big groups, but no proof has been discovered of such a fact. It is called unjust mammon, or the mammon of injustice, as riches are ordinarily, not always acquired in a sinful way, are used for the purposes of injustice, are in themselves delusive. The dealing with large wealth usually leads to some wrongdoing, and as Meyer says, the ethical character of its use is represented as cleaving to itself in this phrase in the parable. But riches can be used so as to secure permanent spiritual blessings. The disciple of Jesus, who does not so use it, is not as prudent as the unjust steward. Generally, his disciples do not. Therefore, Jesus says that the children of this life are more prudent for their generation than the children of light for the world beyond. And, well, one of the things that we do need to look at is that, yes, we regard the world beyond, but it's not, that we're ignoring this life. But you can be super careful about both and combine the two. The Pharisees, who were covetous, heard all these things and derided him. To them he addressed the following parable. We're still in Luke 16, I guess. There was a certain rich man, and he was clothed in purple and fine linen, and feasted sumptuously each day, every day. And a certain poor man by the name of Lazarus was laid at his gate, afflicted with ulcers, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Yet even the dogs came and licked his ulcers. And the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in the underworld he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and saw Abraham from afar, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he called and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am in pain in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that you received your good things in your life, and Lazarus, in like manner, evil things. But now he was comforted here, and you are in pain. And besides all this, there is a great chasm fixed between us and you, so that those wishing to pass hence to you cannot, neither can they pass thence to us. And he said, I beseech you then, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers to testify fully to them, that you may not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. But he said, No, Father Abraham, if one went to them from the dead, they would change their minds. But he said to him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, they would not be persuaded if one rose from the dead. This parable is not intended to be a revelation of the outward condition of individual souls in the spiritual world. Jesus takes the imagery of Jewish and Gentile mythology. See, I use mythology, and a lot of Jewish mythology is Gentile, especially the polytheistic or pantheistic, or whatever you're going to call it, portions of the Kabbalah or other forms of Jewish mysticism, because Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah aren't necessarily the same thing. In fact, they're mostly not the same thing. But yeah, Gentile is not the same thing as being of a different tribe or something. The words in the Bible mean something worse. As the mere drapery for the teaching of most important moral lessons, Abraham's bosom is a metaphor for a place of permanent rest and communing with the good. The whole parable is a short and striking drama, conveying most solemn and impressive lessons. The main lesson is the ruinousness of unbelief in a spiritual world, an unbelief which renders men selfish in this world and engrossed with this world, so that they may be covetous as the Pharisees were, are self-indulgent as the rich man in the parable was. The Pharisees, so far from being clothed in purple and fine linen, were remarkably abstemious in diet and modest in dress, but penuriousness and prodigality, are but penuriousness and prodigality are opposite sins, growing from the trunk of worldliness, that is, overestimate of the value of what addresses the senses, the one finding its pleasure in hoarding, and the other in squandering. And thus, worldliness grows from the root of unbelief in the spiritual world. In the story, two persons are represented as being in extremely opposite conditions. One was rich, the other a beggar. One was clothed in byssus, a linen which was sold in the time of Jesus for its weight in gold, and the garments colored with the most costly dyes. You know, that blue, purple, violet thread that the Jews wear. That, what they dye that with, makes those threads something like 8 times their value in gold at that time. 8 times the weight of gold. The weight of it is, the per weight cost. But those threads, this isn't really the point, but those threads indicated that they were not Satanists. The other did not have clothes enough to cover his sores. The one had a mansion with a gate. The other was homeless and laid about at people's doors, probably by those who desired to be rid of him. In comparison with the splendid condition of the one who fared sumptuously every day, was the fact that the other waited to catch the crumbs which the servants of the former would throw to the beggars and the dogs. These latter, such wretched dogs as prowl in Oriental cities, added to the humiliation of the beggar by being his only attendants, licking his sores, and thus making a contrast with the unfeeling human brother. Now, you do gotta train dogs and cats not to go licking at your wounds. The beggar was named Lazarus in this story. Perhaps it was suggested by the name of the friend of Jesus, whom he was soon to raise from the dead. That men may know that condition is nothing and character everything, Jesus transfers the scene to the underworld. Lazarus dies. He has no funeral, but after death he is happy. Angels escort him to the society of the good and blessed. The rich man dies. His funeral is a pomp, but he is wretched in the underworld. He sees Abraham and Lazarus. He cries to them for help. He has found his pleasure in physical delights. His misery is the want of them. He does not deplore his unbelief, but wants his tongue cool. He is a churchman, even in the underworld. He claims Abraham as his father. Abraham acknowledges the relationship, calling him son, but showing him that is of no avail to a Jew whose character is ruined by unbelief. The rich man's ideas of caste do not desert him in the underworld. Now, for example, in some of those parts, if you wore black, black was a status symbol, and you couldn't wear black unless you were of a particular priestly class or whatever. And in that case, you couldn't wear the solid blue stuff unless you were of certain families in particular. Because priesthood based on family was a very common thing in that part of the world. He does not presume to ask Father Abraham to bring him a drink, but he requests him to send that beggar Lazarus to wait on him. The whole story teaches that in this world or any other, a man is himself, that death does not destroy his identity. The same prejudices and passions a man has here, he has hereafter. Prayers to departed saints do not seem helpful. Abraham could not help the rich man. There is as great a gulf in the spiritual world as in this. Men cannot cross and recross the line at pleasure. Lazarus could not help the rich man if he would. The rich man had not been specially vicious, may have done many things which he ought to have done, and for that he received his good things in this life. Lazarus was not perfect, and he had done many things which he ought not to have done, and he had received his evil things in this life. But the great distinction between them was that Lazarus has built his character on a sure faith in the surpassing importance of the spiritual world, and the rich man had erected his on faith and the surpassing importance of the material world, and this difference is immense. The forlorn wretch would seem to have been anxious to prolong the conversation. He remembered his brothers, but the way he speaks of them leaves us at a loss whether he was more concerned for them or more disposed to arrange God's providence. He desires the dead Lazarus to be sent on an errand for him, and to warn his brothers by telling them that there was a spiritual world. This means that if God had given him sufficient warning, he would not have gone into that torment. The reply of Abraham is stern, and by it Jesus gives a powerful lesson for all time. God knows what kind and amount of evidence is necessary to convince those who will be convinced, and he has given it. He knows that no amount of any kind of evidence will convince those who do not choose to know the truth. And some people may seem completely like that, but if they hear some evidence, but yeah, again, everybody gets at least what they need in terms of believing the right things and doing the right things. The appearance of one from the dead would not be more convincing than the Holy Scriptures, and it must be noticed that almost immediately after this he raised Lazarus from the grave. Now, it would, because that'd be something a person could prove, not just have faith in. And even back then, people noticed issues. That was part of the reason why Gnosticism appeared among the Jews. Before historical Judaism, you can actually say that a sort of Gnosticism would have appeared. I mean, Judaism as by name. A man who had been 4 days dead came back and had no more influence upon the unbelieving Jews than Jesus had, are the writings of Moses. There may have been, many suppose there was, in this parable a lesson for nations, the rich man representing the Jews and Lazarus the Gentiles, well, the non-Jews. Gentiles is the wrong term, because Jew and being a God follower aren't the same thing, and other terms of Gentile. A lot of Jews, for example, nowadays are atheists, and I'm sure that was the case back then too. Less of the case, but the spiritual contrast as to privileges is as great in one case as in another. The Gentiles shall become the children of Abraham by faith, while the Jews shall be cast out. Perhaps he did mean that also, but it is not quite apparent, and we have given above what we think of the clear-sighted hearers of Jesus must have felt to be the meaning of the speaker. Now, you can feel a lot of things, but try to follow conclusions more than mere feelings. It was probably in this connection that he made the following address to his disciples. It is impossible for causes of offense not to come, but woe to him through whom they come. It were better for him that a millstone were hung around his neck, and he cast into the sea, than that he should cause one of these little ones to offend. Take heed to yourselves. If your brother trespass, admonish him, and if he change his mind, forgive him. And if he trespass against thee 7 times in a day, and 7 times turn again to thee, saying, I change my mind, thou shalt forgive him. Then the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord said, and I guess we're still in Luke 17, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard, ye may say to this skyming tree, be rooted up and be planted in the sea, and it would have obeyed you. But who of you, having a slave plowing or tending flocks, will say to him, when he is come from the field, go immediately and recline to eat, and will not rather say to him, make ready, wherewith I may sup, and gird thyself, and serve me until I eat and drink, and afterwards thou shalt eat and drink? Doth he thank the servant because he did the things commanded him? So likewise ye, when ye shall have done the things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable slaves, we have done what was our duty to do. Well, you don't need to downcast yourself like that, but they are profitable because they've done what they were supposed to do, and it had appropriate results, right? This address teaches the behavior proper among brothers. Through the frailty of human character, men will offend, and what is worse, will cause others to offend. It is a thing to be dreaded, but if one's brother commits an offense, he must go to him kindly and admonish, and upon repentance must forgive him, and must do so just as often as the brother offends and repents. As this requires faith, the 12 who were near him united in a prayer for increase of faith, and it has been noticed that this is the only petition in which the whole 12 ever did unite. The reply of Jesus shows something more than a gross marvel, which a literal rendering of words would indicate. It shows that Jesus believed that there was a loftier circle of existence in which faith represents what muscular strength stands for in this lower physical world, and moreover that in that sphere of things are possible which are impossible in this. The disciples were always ready to go into pride, and such a picture of spiritual power Jesus tempered by calling their attention to the fact that they were servants, and that as they expected their slaves to do their duty without feeling that they had laid anyone under obligation, so when the disciples of Jesus had performed their greatest and best works, they were to consider in humility that they had merely done their duty. And we'll get into something from John 11 in the next program.